All right, today we are diving into a huge intellectual battle that went down over a century ago. It's a story all about one explosive idea, an idea about where religion really comes from. It's a classic tale, really. You've got the entire academic establishment on one side, and on the other, one guy who dared to challenge everything they believed. So let's just start with a question that basically turns everything upside down. For the longest time, science had this really neat, tidy story for how belief in God came to be. But what if that whole story, the one that was accepted as fact for decades, what if it got the timeline completely backwards?
To really get why that question was so radical, we first have to understand the theory that absolutely dominated the study of religion back in the late 19th century. It was seen as this simple, straightforward ladder of progress.
And that ruling idea was called the animistic theory. Its biggest champion was the brilliant ethnologist E.B. Tylor, and, well, it was basically the scientific consensus. For almost 30 years, its logic was pretty much untouchable in academic circles.
Okay, so here's the crucial part. It was all seen as this very linear path. The theory went like this. Early humans, trying to figure out dreams and death and stuff, they first imagined that everything had a spirit or a soul. That's step one, animism. Then, over a long, long time, these countless little spirits got organized into a family of distinct gods. That's polytheism. And only at the very end, at the top of the ladder, did humanity finally get to the advanced idea of a single, all-powerful God. Simple, right?
And, the assumption behind this whole theory is, well, it's pretty revealing. This quote from that time perfectly captures the mindset. They truly believed that whatever was simpler, what they called more primitive or even bestial, just had to be older. In their minds, religion was this slow, painful climb from savage superstition up to civilized belief.
But of course, every great story needs a challenger. And in this one, that role was played by a total outsider who actually came from inside the system itself. His name was Andrew Lang.
And this is what makes the whole thing so fascinating. Lang wasn't some random critic yelling from the sidelines. No, he was a former student of E.B. Tylor himself, the father of the whole animistic theory. But the more Lang actually dug into the source material, the more he started to feel that his old teacher's elegant theory, it just didn't quite fit the facts.
Lang's entire challenge, his whole big idea, really started with this one simple but incredibly powerful question. See, the entire evolutionary model depended on the idea that the beliefs of so-called savage peoples were the most basic, the absolute starting point for everything else. But Lang started to wonder, what if the evidence actually showed something totally different? And pulling on that one little thread led him to a discovery that threatened to bring that entire evolutionary ladder crashing to the ground. He found a God that, according to the science of his day, had absolutely no business existing where he found it. So he started looking at the evidence from cultures that were considered the most primitive on the planet, people who were still in the food-gathering stage of development. And there, among tribes and places like Southeast Australia, he kept finding consistent reports of a very specific and surprisingly sophisticated type of belief. He called it the primitive high god. And look, this was not some minor nature spirit. This was a being who is described as the creator of everything, the source of morality itself, a being who is fundamentally kind and good. Now, according to Tylor's theory, an idea this complex should only show up at the very final stage of religious evolution, not at the very, very beginning. And this is where the two theories just collide head-on. Taylor's view saw history as a steady evolution, climbing up from spirits to God. Lang's theory, well, it flipped the whole thing completely on its head. He suggested that maybe belief started with a moral creator God, and that all the stuff about ghosts and ancestors and nature spirits was actually a later corruption of that original purer belief. It wasn't evolution, it was degeneration.
So as you can imagine, dropping a bombshell like this into the middle of a settled academic field, it did not go over well. The establishment was not about to have its foundational theory just torn apart like that.
Lang laid out his entire case in his book, The Making of Religion. He presented his evidence, he made his arguments, and he showed how this high God theory actually explained the data way better than the old animistic one. The reaction was swift, and it was brutal.
The pushback was intense. First, his idea was a direct attack on the idea of evolutionary progress that was frankly the foundation for so much of 19th century science. Second, His evidence came from the reports about primitive peoples, and scholars at the time just couldn't believe they were capable of developing such a lofty, moral concept all by themselves. And finally, even his supporters had to admit that while he had this powerful insight, he hadn't really developed a rigorous, systematic method to prove it. The result? His work was first opposed, and then, even worse, it was just ignored. Silence.
But powerful ideas have a way of sticking around. They don't just disappear. And while Andrew Lang may have lost that initial battle for acceptance, his challenge left a permanent mark on how we study religion.
And here's the real takeaway. Lang's high God theory was never fully adopted in his lifetime. It didn't win. But by showing up with evidence that the old model simply could not explain, he forced everyone to rethink their most basic assumptions. That old, simple certainty was just gone, forever.
You can really see his true contribution in how later historians talked about his work. As one of them put it, Lang destroyed one of the fundamental propositions of evolutionism. He proved that the development of religion wasn't some neat, tidy, straight line from primitive to advanced. And maybe the most important thing is that his work was seen as a permanent conquest because it forced the academic world to finally treat the incredibly complex beliefs of the world's oldest cultures with the seriousness they actually deserved.
So we are left with the question that Lang blew wide open, a question that still echoes today. Did beliefs start in the dark, with a world full of ghosts and spirits that slowly climbed towards something greater? Or did it begin with a bright, shining idea of a single creator, an idea that only later got clouded, obscured, and forgotten? The latter was broken, and we're all still sorting through the pieces.